Hello and welcome to the Yggdrasil podcast. I am your host, Reddit Tosker. Today I have the pleasure of having Quelaag on. Thank you for coming, Quelaag.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You were highly recommended by a lot of people. Like among the people that people ask me to bring onto the podcast, it's you and probably the only person more asked for is Tarnished Archaeologist, but you were like second place.
Oh, thank you. I love Tarnish too. Like his content is super awesome.
How are you feeling today after the the previews?
I'm like I'm very excited. I had some things that were validated for me, but then I also have some things that are shaking some of my theories up a little bit, so I'm really excited to talk about it.
I think I should probably tell inform the audience like the structure that I'm thinking for this podcast because I do want like a section of us just talking about general things,
Of course.
and then we can go into everything that was revealed in the previews, and that
Oh,
might be a smaller thing. But
should I also introduce myself too and like my background and everything?
yeah, please.
Okay, cool. I'll do that really fast. So obviously I'm Quelaag on YouTube. I've been making Soulsborne related content for 12 years now. I started before a lot of people, but my content wasn't great. Just because I was like one of the first doesn't mean it was particularly good. I was like recording my forehead with my shitty MacBook laptop, and it was really difficult to hear me. There was like no good capture equipment back then, so it was like the dinosaur era of YouTube. But I took a break to it was like a 6-year long hiatus, and somehow people stuck around during that 6 years. I came back for Elden Ring, but during that time, I ended up getting my degree and working in the game industry, and I worked for Xbox for about 4 years.
What did you start in when you were first starting as a content creator?
So I started when I like very first started, I was actually with a PvP group called the Black Phantoms on Facebook, and we used to do a lot of like PvP, more like less tournaments and more ganking content. Like it was pretty brutal. um and I want to also give like mini shout out to Kill Snuggle Bunny out there who was like organizing everything. It was super fun. Those were Demon Souls era days. And then after that, I we were all like anticipating Dark Souls 1, and we were like following all the marketing stuff. We were playing it alongside each other all at the same time and like invading with each other. And then when we got to the ending, a few people in my community were like, I don't really understand the ending and I didn't like it. I didn't like how abruptly it ended. And I was like in the corner, like freaking out because I thought it was a wonderful ending because I had been reading all of the item descriptions up until that point and like knew about how like Gwen and Ferhempt were kind of lying and like all this like there was just like a really beautiful secret betrayal that like in the early era before there were a lot of wikis, it was kind of hard to come about lore information and like share that information with other people. So my content was largely me like verbally telling people over YouTube like what had happened and how you can like unlock certain things, like how you can run into Kaith and like get that ending. So that was when my YouTube channel initially popped off back in that time. And that was like before Epic Name Bro started making videos, like lore videos. And then he started making them, I want to say like a year or so after.
So I'm actually very surprised. I didn't know that part of your. I didn't know that you were into PvP early on. It,
Yeah.
is that something that you still are into in Elden Ring?
So I actually used to compete in tournaments for a video game called Gundam Extreme Verse. I was like a mech player before. And around the time that I got into college, like around the time that I went on hiatus, I actually stopped PvPing in like mech style games or like Demon Souls. And I ended up focusing um more on like PvE progression content in Final Fantasy 14. And that was like I needed to shift to something that was scheduled and structured and like a little bit less competitive in that way because I was like in my upper grad stuff in college and that was stressful. I don't know. I just needed to like shift the way that I was engaging with video games, which sounds, I don't know, that may not make sense, but it for some reason made sense in my brain.
Let me ask you a question about Demon Souls. Actually,
Yeah.
I played Demon Souls on release, and I was into PvP, but I Demon Souls is the only one where I kind of joined in the social aspect of PvP, like in a community. And after that, I just
Yeah.
kind of PvP'd quietly on my own with Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2 and so on. Um, were there other groups? Because I remember there was a large group of people that did similar stuff to that, organized by a person called Midipore. Uh, did some kind of it was some kind of Hunters Guild PvP group that did stuff very similar to what you described with the Black Phantom group.
Yeah. So, I hadn't heard of MIDI, but it's really weird because like back then, like I said, there wasn't like wikis, and I guess you could get on like I mean, Reddit was around, but it wasn't really being used the way that it is now. I'm trying to think of just like how I came about. Like it came about the Black Phantoms because I think I was invaded by Kill.
Hmm.
And I think I distinctly remember like looking them up after they fought me because the whole interaction was so funny. They like invade like I remember it's so weird. I have like really tangible memories of Demon Souls, but like I couldn't tell you the same kind of stories from Dark Souls. But like I think it was just because that was my first game. But Kill invaded me in Stonefang Tunnel with the baby's nail and gave me plague when I was like level 20. And I had never seen that status effect before. I didn't like for those of you that are unfamiliar with it, it ticks like scarlet rot. It ticks like a really nasty scarlet rot. And I had never seen you haven't seen poison at that point in the game, but you haven't seen plague at that point in the game either. And so when I got hit with plague and it just like ticked me, I think that like I immediately was like, I gotta find this person. Like I gotta talk shit. And when I found them, I saw that they had this whole Facebook group and I actually joined it because of that. But I think that to be honest, like I actually think that's how a lot of us ended up in that group was because Kill was running around being a nuisance. But I also learned like a lot of some of my like favorite builds through that group. That was like my social outlet for kind of like those early years of college, like right before I started or like when I was doing my undergrad and I had a lot more like free time and flexibility. That was kind of like my little internet home for a bit.
Hmm.
But yeah, trying to like think back on like how people found each other back then is so weird. It
I
definitely
don't
felt like a
remember.
weird
I don't remember
it
exactly either.
it's like also sorry, my dog's gonna snore in the background occasionally. Sorry about the noise. But yeah, it was like it was odd. We had what was that one forum? Oh my god, it's still around now, but it's not as like prestigious. There was like that one video game forum that was like only developers are on this like website. Ugh. Like it was really I wish I could remember what it was. But there was that and then there was like select button which had a lot more like content creators on it and then there was I know that we had the Wikidot back in the day, but we didn't have like Fextra or like any wiki spaces or a lot of people were like translating directly from the Live Door website. It was dark ages.
Hmm.
It was dark ages.
Anyway,
Yeah,
to
sorry,
get
tangent. I
yeah,
also just a warning, I have really, really, really bad ADHD, so we're gonna be rambling a lot,
yeah,
and I'm so
tangents are
sorry.
fine. Tangents are fine.
Okay, cool.
I'll try and circle us back to wherever it is that we were at once we're done.
Thank you.
Um, right. So this is going to be spoiler free for until I say otherwise, until we're ready to talk about the previews. But we are probably going to talk about everything before the previews. So, for example, the story trailer and what the story trailer might imply. That anything that happened up until yesterday, when the previews dropped, all that information is fair game. So if you are watching this, hoping I'll probably make this clear in the title and thumbnail. Uh, this is safe to watch. I'll let you know when it's no longer, and I'll put a timestamp telling you when you should be cautious. Do you have anything to add for that?
Nope.
Okay, as long as you're okay with that structure.
Yeah, I'm totally cool with that.
All right. So I asked people what I intended to get more familiar with your content before we had this podcast. Uh,
That's totally okay if you haven't. It's really it is like 50-minute long videos of me just like screaming. So like I totally don't mind at all if I have to reiterate anything. It's
Right.
totally okay.
Normally, I wouldn't have a problem with it, but a lot has happened, and a lot has been happening
Yes.
quickly. And I just ran out of time to really familiarize myself with it. But I did ask people that are your fans, what you specialize in, and I would like to know what do you think about the timeline of events in Elden Ring? Because that's probably something that I struggle with, and specifically surrounding the Eternal Cities. Um, okay, so for
Yeah.
example, where do you think the Eternal Cities fall in the timeline? Were they around in the same time period as Marika and or the Golden Order?
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh, I have like a lot to talk about in regard to the Undercities too, because I've been like having to differentiate between like the Ool Palace ruins
Mm,
and the Eternal Cities for my followers quite a bit, and we've been talking about it a lot. So my area of specialization, like I majored in research methodology and psychology, but like during I was doing all my undergrad, I was still like undecided on what I was going to major in, and I ended up taking a lot of like sociology and art history courses when I was trying to like figure out what I was doing. And during that time, I fell like very deeply in love with I went to like this school that had a really robust archaeology program. And a lot of it was like Mesoamerican stuff, but we took courses for like a wide range of ancient history. And so I have a lot of these like art like if for those of you that have had to take like an art history elective, you probably can relate, but like sometimes you'll just get certain visuals like baked into your mind when you start to understand like a particular culture or like certain little like artistic details. Like if you see like uniform alphabet anywhere, you're able to be like, "Oh, I know where that's from," you know? And so when you're walking around the lands between, there are a lot of like real life historical assets that are like quite literally scanned into the game, to the point where you can actually like read some of the alphabet that's in the game. And like a really like popular example of that is there's a big like the big stone tablets that are around the catacombs are like these giant like gravestones, but the gravestones have Hebrew on them. And so you can like clock that there's kind of like a cultural inspiration for a particular like level design. And what's interesting is when you start to realize that there's all these like cultural inspirations and you start to learn about the actual in-game lore in the story, you realize that like whoever the art director is like totally cracked and is able to like fully use real world history, culture and like beats like war and certain historical events to kind of like illustrate what's happening in the story. At first, I thought it was kind of like, oh, there's like very ancient, like Mesopotamian architecture and art down in the old palace ruins. So therefore, the feeling that it's supposed to like evoke in the player is that this is very old. And I think that that's like surface level. That's what Miyazaki's team and FromSoft are like all doing. Is they're kind of like evoking an emotion. But then when we get into like Landell and we see all the Roman inspiration and there's some kind of like vague Catholic imagery and then also like a lot of the Celtic and Norse imagery from like Godfrey's era and a lot of the kind of like Badland tribes that then settled in West Rome, you start to realize like, oh, this is actually echoing what happened in history when the schism happened, when like West Rome was given to a lot of tribes that settled. Um, so it's like super interesting to see the historical allegories. I try to, like, not put too much weight on Elden Ring being one-to-one with real world history, but, like, I wanna acknowledge, like, what Miyazaki's trying to say there. So, to kind of, like, loop back around to the Eternal Cities are super weird because, like, obviously, we have the Mesopotamian architecture, which is, like, 3000 BC to, like, 2500 BC. Um, it's like super old. It's like the advent of written language, it's the advent of agriculture, it's like the advent of city planning and like canals. It's like sedentary civilization, like the first um like real society that has like that kind of technology, right? Like and by technology I mean like written language. um but then with the Eternal Cities, they're like it's almost like neo gothic almost. Like it's quite it's so much more modern that it's like very striking. So much so that you can confuse it with like Raya Lucaria almost. Like there's some elements of that, but that makes me think that it is like a very new city. And there's some kind of like conversation that me and my community have been having about whether or not the people that like settled and created Ul are like the Nox or the Newman, and whether or not like that civilization then grew into the Eternal Cities, or if the Eternal Cities rolled up on the ruins of the Ul Palace and like plopped down their civilization on top of it. And I think there's like things that support it, and there's also things that kind of don't support it. And all we have is like visual information to go off of because it's never explicitly stated anywhere in the item descriptions or anything like that. So we're kind of just guessing at this point. But I think like a really important thing that we've been seeing in like the current marketing, and I kind of want to give a disclaimer for people that are like um trying to avoid like all of the trailers, not just like the newest one, but like all of them. I'm going to talk about one of the gameplay trailers. Also, let me go get my dog really quick too. Hold
Sure.
on. All right, I'm back. Sorry. Sometimes I have to sit with him in my lap so he shuts up. So he's going to be joining us for the podcast. Um, but yeah, one of the things that like comes to mind is there's these like black obelisks that have they're like based off of a real obelisk that is Neo-Assyrian. But it's like from Mesopotamia, and like I want to say it's like 2500 BC, but that obelisk is like scanned one to one. You can still see the cuneiform on it, like at the base. But then like the art team has changed the like sculptures and reliefs on the inside of the obelisk. Like that's all original art, but everything else is not original, which is super weird. It's like they went in and took like a famous sculpture and like changed parts of it to kind of fit the narrative. And like in the very top relief on that obelisk, there's like ships, there's boats, which is also not typical of like the boats are quite like large. They look like big pirate ships almost, you know? Like they don't look like ancient boats or anything like that. But we saw in the trailer in the area with the blue flowers and like the red dancer, we see these like big structures that almost look like
Backs of
beached
boats.
ships. Yeah. And so a lot of people are speculating like, oh, okay, so this might play into the Ul Palace ruins reliefs and like art and stuff. This might be depicting when the Newmen have landed, and maybe the Newmen are responsible for the Ul Palace cities. But like there's also a piece of me that is like, but the architecture between the Eternal Cities and the Ul Palace ruins are just so different that you don't really see like a transition from one culture into another. It's quite literally like you have ancient Mesopotamia and then like slightly more modern Europe kind of just like crunched on top of it. So it's like it does feel very alien and very abrupt. Like there's not like this transition of history below there at
W-
all that's happening.
Well,
So
the Eternal Cities weren't originally there, were they? Like there was
no, no. But like the question is whether or not the Nox or the Newmans settled and did Ul Palace, and then when their technology advanced, then they built the Eternal Cities. But, like, I would argue, given, like, the, like, abrupt shift and how different the art direction is between the 2 groups, that, like, I kinda wonder if they're even related at all.
hmm. I've not what I focused on in my lore things, but I've just assumed that the Eternal Cities were on the surface at one point. They talk there's just item descriptions that talk about how they had a emphasis with the stars. You know, they're always looking to the stars, and then Estelle levels the city, takes away their sky, and now they're underground and they're like almost on top of the old palace ruins, and they well old ruins, and they almost as if those ruins were down there and these were just slammed on top of it.
Yeah, it's weird because I would also kind of like I know for a fact that we have, like, the instance of, like, the Newmen who were banished underground, but as far as, like, the actual cities themselves originally being up top, it is a little bit strange because the Eternal Cities themselves act as like aqueducts and dams, and like there's like the dam that is sectioning off the um the Lake of Rot, for example. Like there's a lot of aquatic and kind of like underground structures that are like intentionally built into the geography down there. So I do wonder, like, if the Undercities were ever up top, how would the structures that are like coming down like stalagmites be that way? And like, how would the rivers kind of like be up above to kind of reflect the dam and like the aqueduct structure that's happening?
Well, let
I would,
me ask you this: the Nox and the Newman. We have Roger, and he says that the Black Knife
mhm.
assassins are signs from the Eternal Cities, and the Black Knife armor says that there are rumored to be Newman. So are the Newman the Nox, or related to the Nox, or descended from the Nox,
Yeah,
or one or the other?
I think that we kind of see like like this strange thing that happens when you're living within like line of sight of the Erd tree. And I don't know if you notice like there's like ancestral followers that are in the Undercities that are like ghosts. They like glow blue and they're transparent. But you can only find them in the Undercities. And there's also like some of the culture, like if you read about the ancestral follower like spirit ashes, they say they tried to like exist out of the purview of the Erd tree. So I almost kind of wonder if there is like something that happens to like life forms that like exist without sunlight, and why they might be pale or why they might like manifest in the way they do. I think also the dragonkin soldiers are like a really interesting example of that. And then when the like fallen hawk members like burn the bodies of like their comrades, they get like cold ghost flame, which is super weird. Like it just seems like there's something weird happening in the undercities that is almost like the absence of warmth and light, and it like deprives certain kind of life forms from existing. So I wonder if there's this transition of like humans that live within the sunlight versus like humans that live, you know, banished down below and have to exist in like the dark and the cold, and how their bodies are in that regard. But I think that some things are left like intentionally obscure or obtuse in the same way that like, like Koss's murder was kind of left obtuse in Bloodborne. And I think we're gonna get a lot of big reveals in the DLC regarding that.
Yeah, I'm hoping so as well.
Yeah.
My side of this lore debate is that I just don't I think there's too many holes. I think there's too many holes to the point where I don't
Agreed.
think there was this many holes in Dark Souls. I think that we had more consensus in Dark Souls 1, 2 and 3 as to what was going on, and the evidence was more clear, and the lore community wasn't the way it I can't get people to agree with anything. Like I can't get people to agree. Like I can't find a consensus on like basic points. We'll get to this later, but like the Night of the Black Knives, big lore contention as to what happened and was America involved with it. What was the goal? Who was involved and who wasn't involved? Or is America pro greater will or anti greater will? And people that maybe are listening to this will be like will think to themselves, well, clearly she's pro or clearly she's anti, and they'll have a bunch of reasons in their heads. But type in pro or anti and be shocked at the like 50-50 split that you'll find of people
Yeah.
not sure. Uh right. So my position is I don't think there's enough information to come to a conclusive uh
Yeah.
I'm happy to speculate. I think we should all be speculating, and I think the best theories are the ones that are a little unhinged. Uh, but I don't think that I can prove anything, and I don't think I
Yeah.
right.
I agree. Like I think we have like jokes about this actually in my community. Like we have certain things that are called trap cards during stream because it'll fully derail the stream if we talk about them. And I would say Radagon's origin is one of those. We don't have enough information about whether or not Radagon was always Marika or if he was some other
Never his
guy.
own person.
Yeah, so that's
I've made a wager that he was never his own person. For
yeah, yeah. And then there's also the theory, which I feel like has a lot of credence about Radagon being like a mimic, like a Simi kind of, like mirroring the Asimi quest line that was cut content. given like Marika's relationship with the Eternal Cities, but also her relationship with Mischief and illusion magic and all that other stuff. So there's like theories within my community about that.
I don't think I've heard of that
Um,
one. Do you know the details of it?
yeah, there's a video that I could pull up, but yeah, I think I might have to send it to you later.
Yeah.
I don't have like every single piece of information, but I know during like the Asimi quest line, she refers to herself as like if I copy you, like if I because she's for those of you that don't know, she's like the mimic tier that we get as like a summonable item, but she has her own quest line originally in the game, and she follows you around like you eat her and she like exists inside of you for a little bit, and you follow her around and she has like unique dialogue at different guidances of grace, kind of like how Melina does. And she'll talk to you about the stuff she's learned while she's been with you. And then she says, she gets to a point where she's like learned enough. And she says that when you serve as Elden Lord above, she'll serve as eternal sovereign down below. And she goes down into the Undercities and like potentially rules. But then when you go down into the Undercities, when we fight the Mimic tier, that is supposed to be that boss fight when we kind of like realize that she's separated from us. There's also like weird imagery regarding D and his twin with like the silver and the gold, one of them being above and one being below, and just like the weirdness of like the Undercities and the like Landell capital, um, with like the gold people being on top and then the silver people being down below. It's just like weird stuff. So a lot of people think like given the nature of the title Eternal Sovereign, and then we have like Queen Marika the Eternal, there's just some like loose connections there, that the namesake is just really similar. But yeah, there's a lot of bizarreness around it. And then she calls Radagon her other self, just stuff like that. But
So
as far as like his red hair and some of the other implications, it's like it can be anything at this point. I'm not like fully sold on that theory, but I think it's like an interesting one. And then there's also, like him potentially being related or being cursed by the giants is like a whole other thing too. So I don't know.
yeah. Um, so just to get back to the Knox Newman thing,
Yeah.
do you have a theory as to what specifically is going on with their relationship?
So I do I think I think that the Nox did come on ships. Like I think that there might be something regarding that, especially since we see them with the um Red Warrior. Like I think that there's going to be something important regarding the story of like the wandering swordsman and sealing away the god of rot, because that imagery is being evoked there
Yeah.
with like her moveset and her like attire and that red and blue color palette, because like the wandering swordsman's blue but he seals away a god of rot that's like red, but now we have like a flipped inverted color palette with like a blue field and like a red warrior. So there's some like
Yeah.
cool imagery that's happening, and then with the boats it just screams like maybe like early Eternal City. Um, and I'm curious to see if how like the ruined labyrinth is above ground.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see if there was a landmass that potentially connected the above and below at any point, or like you said, like if there is any more evidence that we have of pieces of the Undercity being above ground, or learning about that banishment or that exile. I think like
Well,
they
I
were
mean,
exiled below ground because of the Finger Slayer blade
uh, I think it's
or the Dark Moon, maybe.
The Nox swords armor. Long ago, the Nox invoked the ire of the Greater Will and were banished deep underground. Now they live under a false night sky, in eternal anticipation of their liege.
But the thing that's always struck me is that Ronnie was talking about the relic in Nokron and the fact that it's a Finger Slayer blade, which is like what's used to kill a god,
Right.
makes me think that like there was some kind of greater betrayal that was happening at some point in their history where they were trying to like overthrow.
Well, yeah, that must be the banishment that led to them being banished underground. But
Yeah.
it does seem to imply that they were not underground because the description says that they were
Well,
banished
no.
deep underground.
Yeah. I think the people themselves were definitely above ground. But as far as the
Oh, I
cities
see.
themselves, I'm not quite sure because the aqueducts and the way that the rivers run down below is like it the Lake of Rotterdam is just like so important to like this story because like the Wandering Blue Swordsman is like the flowing water. So we have the Ainsel and the Shiofro waters that are like flowing between the cities, but then we have this big dam that is sectioning off Rot, which could kind of be there's some people in my community that see that story of the Wandering Swordsman as like a metaphor for this like dam system
You
that's
don't
down
think that
there.
that could have been built after they were but the reason I keep harping on about is because
No, it's okay.
the remembrance of Estelle talks about how he once destroyed an eternal city and took away their sky.
Yeah, and
And
that's that there's like a lot of people are thinking that night sky may have been like the nameless eternal cities like stars which are missing. I know that that's like a theory because all the other eternal cities have like that weird starry particle effect that's down there.
mm,
And then they also created the false Sorry, I want to make sure that I get my naming conventions right because there's like 5 different moons in the game or like 3 different moons. So I'm trying to make sure I have it accurate. But there is like the regular full moon, the dark moon or like the black side, the dark side of the moon, the side that's the opposite of the moon, and then there's the artificial black moon that the Ender cities created. And I kind of wonder if that bit of lore, like this artificial moon and the artificial sky that they have below, is what Estelle took, which is why we find Estelle burrowing underground. He has like a whole burrowing cave system. And he's also an antlion, so he's down digging holes and like hunting his prey underground. Um, but I kind of wonder if that's why he's down there, is because we have this false night sky that was artificially created by humans. So I always got the story of like human hubris down there, but also, like we said, we don't know enough about the
yeah.
Eternal Cities, so it's like I could be totally wrong. We're not quite sure just yet.
So do you think Estelle is connected to the Greater Will? Because we have the Fingerslayer blade and talks about their betrayal, and then you have the Sword Mistress's armor that talks about how they invoke the ire of the Greater Will, probably with the Fingerslayer blade, and then they were banished deep underground. Now they live under a false night sky. Um, and the Fingerslayer blade talks about how it is a symbol of their downfall, something like that. Uh,
Okay,
yes,
this is my theory regarding this is like so this is where we're getting into territory that's going to be so off the beaten path, and I'm so sorry to the people listening right now because it's going to sound like totally cracked. But I also have like a really unique perspective on the greater will compared to a lot of people. A lot of people think the greater will is like an entity that is totally separate from Marika, like completely separate. And I feel that there's some stuff happening. There's some stuff linguistically that is referencing Dante's Paradiso, especially with the word Empyrean, that is like super interesting. Where like the upper layer of heaven is like filled with this like celestial fire. And when somebody enters that layer of heaven, their will and God's will merge into one. They like melt in the fire and it merges into like one will. And I feel like given the fact that the Elden Ring used to be different in structure and Marika changed that structure, she was merging her will with this like written scripture. And I think that at that point in history, whenever she did, like that the cinematic trailer where she's like ripping what looks like the runes out of that dead thing and
mm-hmm,
she's like holding it up and ushering in her age of gold. I think
mm-hmm.
at that point is when the greater will shifted to kind of like mirror this agenda of order and life and um, abundance. And I think that the two fingers in the greater will take shape based off of that. Some people think the greater will has like its own agenda and wanted to be removed or wanted death to be removed intentionally. That could also be true. But given some of the like weird dialogue that
Do you think the
Shibariri and Hayeta
fingers?
have, I
Do you,
think it all used to be one.
do you think the fingers weren't around before America?
I think the fingers were around, but I think that the fingers represent the concepts of order and balance and how to exist with both. And I think that like okay, so I'm gonna say it loud and say it proud, but I'm like a Shabriri Hayeta believer. I know that like Shabriri is so like the Golden Order um likes to label certain groups as liars or as like unholy or as barbaric. Um and I think that that like is a really I don't believe in the whole like unreliable narrator thing that some people talk about, but I do believe that Miyazaki will tell us when the narrator is lying to us. And there's like multiple NPCs and multiple item descriptions, like the Crucible Knot Talisman, Hayeta's dialogue, and Shabriru's dialogue, where they talk about how things were once disdained or were once holy, but they're now disdained as society's like changed. But I think Shabriri and Hayeta are like harkening back to like or like talking about an era that all concepts used to be married into one, but now that the concepts have been separated from each other, it's like we can't go back, and so we have to destroy it in order for something different to happen. It's kind of like breaking the wheel or breaking the cycle. Um, I don't like the frenzied flame ending, but like I do believe what they're saying is actually true. Like I do think that
Well,
things used to be one.
yes, but I think I take issue there a bit because um, you see, is it your position that they're trying to make something else by
No, I think they're trying to like I think that it's almost like the damage hasn't been done and we can't go backwards. So you just have to break it in order to stop all the suffering that's already been caused. I don't necessarily think that the frenzied flame ending is this like idea of a that there's going to be like a new cycle. I think that it's like intentionally pretty finite, like it's supposed to embody
okay,
that sense of despair that you feel when, you know, you witness something like political atrocities or like, you know, one of the big ones is like witnessing the genocide and like the caravan being buried below the Capitol. I think that that's supposed to invoke that feeling of like, well, if this kind of suffering is allowed under this kind of era, should this era continue to exist? And I think that the frenzied flame is a very finite, definitive answer of like, no, it should end. Like all things should end. But I'm more like I agree with Melina. Like I definitely think that like there's ways to amend it and
yeah,
fix it and to not give in to
birth
despair.
continues, and there's beauty in that.
But I
Yeah,
exactly, but I that doesn't mean that I don't believe that what Shabriri and Hayeta are saying about the past is not, you know, I don't think that they're lying. I think that they're being honest about
well,
how all things used to be one.
the thing is that I take them literally, like I take them at their word literally, like I believe them
Oh.
completely that they're,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
I mean that I don't
But
think
believing in their purpose is
yes.
like not yeah, I don't believe in their purpose. No, no,
Well,
no.
no, it's not even that. It's more like I don't think that they're just saying that the structure, the current existing order, and the atrocities that are allowed to continue. It's not that simple. They're not just talking about that. They when they say that everything used to be one, they mean that everything used to be one thing, and in a separate way from even the Crucible. Even if you assumed the Crucible, we can talk about the Crucible and the Great Tree
Yeah.
later. Like we can talk about whatever. But even if you, they're talking about how they don't want distinctions between anything. They don't want
Yeah.
they don't want distinctions between um, the very
Yes.
fact that things are different is the cause of all the suffering. The very fact that one thing is different from any other thing is the cause of
Yes.
suffering, and suffering is ubiquitous, and it's so bad that all things should end. Not necessarily specifically this current order or the things that this current order allows. It's anything is my interpretation of their
100%. And but I think that like Dark Souls, it's been weird because I've been looking at this from like a Eastern philosophy perspective, which like acknowledges that disparity causes suffering and that suffering is like a fact of life,
right,
right? It's like a thing
right.
that we have to endure. But I think that there's like another layer to it on top of that of maybe things can exist in balance with each other as like opposite concepts. And I think that the previous era all things existed but were conjoined, and that it was at the point that Marika pulls out death.
Are we talking about the Crucible now?
No, not yet.
Okay.
But more that story trailer. It just reminded me so much of the Dark Souls 1 intro where it talks about how there was nothing and there was like eternal dragons, there was like this eternal era of stillness. There was nothingness and then Gwyn found the souls of lords and then all of a sudden there was disparity. There was fire, there was dark, there was life and death, there was heat and cold. That's like all in the Dark Souls 1 intro. I'm finding that Marika separating the rune of death, um it's weird. It's almost like there was nothingness, there was like everything that were opposites, but they all existed in tandem with each other. And then there was Marika who kind of like furthered that, almost like she like drove a wedge between opposing concepts. Like she like recognized disparity and like took it further. And so it kind of seems like there's like some interesting.
I'm very pro that idea. I've always been very pro that idea. I was trying to. I just think there's a difference specifically with the Flame of Frenzy. I, uh,
I
est,
think
est,
I get what you mean though. Like almost like returning like if there's a step 1, a step 2, a step 3, they're returning all the way to like step 0,
yeah, yeah,
right?
um, right. So I'm actually very receptive to what you're talking about. I
Yeah,
think
yeah, yeah.
it's just when we're trying to connect to the Flame of Frenzy, that's when I think that's I don't think that that's what they represent. I think their representation is probably the clearest thing for me
Yeah,
in
agreed.
Elden Ring. Um, but okay, let me like go way further back because I feel like I've not gotten clear uh
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Go
answers
for
on
it. Go
all
for
of my
it. No,
all,
we had to like establish the nuance
right.
with all of this stuff first.
Okay,
So let's go back.
so regarding Estelle, Estelle destroys the Eternal Cities. We have lore connections connecting the Greater Will being attacked by the Nox, I suppose.
Hmm.
Um, and then Estelle seems to destroy the Eternal Cities. They're banished underground. Maybe. Um, does Estelle have a connection to the Greater Will or
I
Marika?
I think okay, so yeah, yeah, yeah. Going back. So I think the greater will is as an outer god a loose concept that is shaped and formed by the state of the Elden Ring itself. I think that like if the Elden Ring changes shape, the Elden Beast and the tree itself will also change shape, and we see that with the endings. Like if you plug in different ruins, you get a different color skybox and it, like the Elden Beast would probably also change with that too. Like if you usher in the era of those who live in death, I'm sure the Elden Beast might be like grayish or whatever. Like the flavors change based on how things are like represented. So do I think Estelle has to do with that? Not necessarily. I kind of see the outer gods as almost like more animalistic
Mm,
and like without mortal consciousness. Like I don't think that they're as flawed or as like self-aware or conscious as like say Marika and the demigods are. I think that they're like totally they're just creatures, if that makes sense.
right. So Marika didn't send Estelle to destroy
No.
the Nox.
I think that
Coincidence?
what no, I think so I talked about this a little bit in depth. This is like a totally like unhinged theory that I have, but like given like the ripple blade and given some of the like um antlion imagery that's going on with this still. Antlions are blind and they're able to like find their prey through vibrations. And if there's
Mm,
a planet or celestial bodies that are created, it would then create vibrations. And I think that Estelle potentially attacked the Eternal Cities because of the artificial creation of the Dark Moon. I think we can apply like we can say that they were being punished, for their actions, but I don't think there was like some kind of divine or celestial mortality, like or not mortality, like morality associated with it. I don't think it was like they were flying too close to the sun. I think that they did a thing that made a bug hungry.
right.
And so then Estelle popped up.
So then the item description that talks about how the Nox invoked the ire of the Greater Will and were banished underground. Do you think that's separate from Anything
I
that
think
still
that that
happened?
was the Finger Slayer blade. So I think Finger Slayer blade would have been the thing that got them banished, like if they were trying to overthrow whoever was in power at that
Okay.
time.
Okay.
And then I think the creation of the Dark Moon, like they settle underground, they create a society, they start experimenting with mimic tears,
Okay.
they start like establishing themselves down there, and then they create a false night sky, they create like the cosmos underneath there, and then they start having too much of a good thing, and then Estelle rolls up and is like, I love to eat fake moons. It's delicious.
All right. And are we using Nox and Newman interchangeably then?
I
We're assuming.
I suppose. Yeah, I would assume that like the Newmen are the ones that were able to like stay above ground for whatever reason, and the Nox were the ones that were like rallied up and sent below ground. But like I still am so shaky on, like they're Nox and then when they come above ground, are they suddenly Newman? Or, you know, at what point do they change? Like at what point do they start bleeding silver? Like what, you know?
Hmm. This is probably a good place to talk about the great tree. Are you a pro or anti great tree person?
So I'm definitely like I think there were many trees. Like I think that there were rulers before Marika and like the Glowmide Queen. And I think that there were trees that were created based off of, and this goes into like imagery that's from Dark Souls and like previous Miyazaki games. I think that like if you've played other games, you can kind of catch on that like the trees are extensions of like a lord's era. So like the kiln of the first flame is built on top of a giant tree, and in order to like influence that age, you have to collect like lord souls or a mass amount of like human experiences, put them in the kiln, and then that powers that age. But then in Elden Ring, it's a little bit different. In Elden Ring, instead of it being souls, it's like quite literally the dead bodies of everybody in that era. So I've always seen trees as kind of like the zeitgeist of like a given society. Like that is the law and the rules and the social attitudes, and everybody that lives underneath a certain society would then be attached to that tree, and that
Okay.
that tree kind of like symbolizes that. But we also see with the ancestral followers that they can grow their own trees, and that they have a whole practice about sacrificing those who don't bud horns into those who do bud horns, and then growing trees out of those corpses. So like the ancestral follower antlers are like sprouting tree leaves. There's like green foliage on the ends of them.
So
So yeah, I think that
you think
I think that there
there
was,
were multiple
yeah,
trees?
I think that there were multiple trees, and I think but as far as like the the great tree, I kind of wonder if that is getting into like spoilery territory now, because now we have something else that I don't want to talk about
Right.
until we give a spoiler warning.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, then let's talk about something related regarding the story trailer. Maybe this won't lead into the previews. Um,
Hmm.
what do you think of the theory that I've heard popularized that the story trailer where America, gets the golden strands and she's holding them above her head and she seems to be having like a very masculine pose. Some people have been telling me that they think that that's where Radigan was born. That um, the cutscene, the narrator seems to be telling us that this is where gold arose, and it's also where Shadow was born. And some people view Radigan as Marika's shadow. What do you think of that theory?
So I'm definitely more in the line of the shadow that's being talked about there is quite literally referencing the rune of death, because it's the opposite or like the opposing rune of Queen Marika's. It
Yeah,
like mirrors it.
it's also called the
Um,
shadow of.
yeah, exactly. It's also called the Forbidden Shadow. Yeah, 100%. So I think that that's what it's referring to. It's referring to like the rune of life and abundance was established by Queen Marika when she's holding up the strands and they're kind of connecting to the bodies. She's like her silhouette and her pose and like the dipping down of like the runes that she's holding um looks like her rune. Like it looks like her great rune.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's supposed to be representing that. And I think also too, the Glowmide Queen was the entity that held her shadow rune. And the sky is like gloam on the outside of the pillars of bodies.
So you do assume that the thing that she's taking it out of is the Glowmite Queen?
Yeah, so like there's been a lot of theories in my community, like is that an eyeball? Is that like some other creature? What is that? And there's certain frames that you can kind of pause where you can actually see there's like loose threads in the garment that she's like reaching into.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very clear that it's like because the idea that it was like an eyeball, I was like, ooh, that actually fits with some of Miyazaki's like symbols that he uses quite a bit, especially with like a lot of the eyes in Bloodborne and like eyes being symbolic of cosmic knowledge with like Gideon's staff and stuff. But the threads were just like so weird. Like it's so out of place. It to me it almost looks more like a pregnant belly
Right.
and she's like reaching into the garment. But as far as like what it actually is, we can only guess, you know.
Right. But you're for sure assuming that the Glowmite Queen is an important part of the
Yeah.
DLC. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're gonna hear echoes of that if we get to experience Marika's story, for sure.
Well, I'm glad. Now, does that mean that you are now what was your position on Melina being the Glowmite Queen before,
I think
and did you change your mind after the story trailer?
oh, no, not at all. So, like, I definitely am pro Melina as the Glow-Eyed Queen. I feel like it's quite obvious, but I think it's like so the circumstances of her birth are, like, weird. She's burnt and bodiless. She doesn't have a physical self, and she's only able to move in proximity of the tree. Um, like, she's only able to move freely once we take her to the base of the Erd tree. And there's just some, like, bizarre aspects of her nature, like, there's the Bach dialogue that she has when you tell Bach that he's beautiful and talk about his mother. She's like, "Oh, does being born of a mother mean somebody feels this way?" Like,
Mm-hmm.
she's super confused about the circumstances of, like, her existence and also her birth, even though she calls Marika her mother. Um, but I think that it's more likely that Melina is almost like a remembrance in some way or like a fragment of the Glowmite Queen, because a lot of remembrances are carved or like hewn into the Erd tree. Um, and so it makes sense that given like the way that her ghost works and that she's able to move freely around the tree, it kind of just like and also around guidances of grace she like manifests. It makes sense to me that like maybe she's a fragment of the Glowmite Queen or like a reborn spirit who has amnesia until her eye opens and until she kind of like starts to learn more about herself.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I think that's kind of my feeling about her. She's super interesting, and I'm excited to see if we learn anything more about her because the fact that she has Torrent's ring and also gets upset when Torrent is killed in the frenzied flame ending makes me think a lot about her and like how Mikola ended up with her ring.
Right. I was about to say something about the previews, but no, we're not there yet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um. Okay. Okay. What do you think about the theory that Mesmer is the son of the Glowmite Queen and Radigan? Because he kind of has an appearance similar to the Godskin apostles. He's tall, he's lanky, he's got a similar skin tone. Um, he's got snakes on him. The Godskin nobles have snake tails.
Yeah, there's like aspects of the crucible kind of like popping up there.
Well, yeah, yeah, but the weird thing is that it seems to be there is a line that talks about it being crucible, but you only really see the snake tail on the Godskin noble and the fact that the apostles can elongate themselves the way that the snake people. So yeah, crucible, but also specifically snake.
Yeah. And I this is like kind of off topic from your question. I long story short, I do think that Mesmer is Marika's child. Um, given the fact some people were pointing out that Marika has like bracelets that kind of look like snakes, and there's some like thematic similarities happening there. I know that there's the whole like people are speculating that maybe Mesmer isn't Marika's child because of the word affair and some of the stuff that's happening during that like story cinematic. But I think Miyazaki's being transparent with us that that is Marika's child. As far as like if it's Marika and Radagon's child or like their first child before, you know, like I wonder if he was born in secret or if he was born publicly. Like we only are hearing about him now, so the circumstances of his birth are also very weird, but it's clear like where in history he was born, which is like super bizarre because we would assume that like Marika had her children with Radagon like later in her
Yeah,
life, like after Godfrey's marriage.
yeah,
But it kind of seems like maybe Mesmer was like a first attempt and then she married Godfrey.
like a firstborn. Eh,
Yeah. But
but
sorry, go for it.
okay, so you don't think that he's related to the Glowmite Queen at all? You think he's America Radigan thing?
I wonder about it because I kind of am starting to like I'm open, obviously, like I'm open to anything. Like I'm not the type that would be really bummed out if things were different. But I do think that like it's fishy that he has flame kind of similar to the fire giants, and it's also fishy that like he has some snake imagery going on. There's a piece of me that kind of wonders if the way that demigods give birth is almost through like fragments of the rune, and like if they're kind of like how Melina would be like a fragment of the Glowmite Queen. I kind of wonder if there are like there's that kind of like fragmented self happening. And the reason why I've been thinking about this a lot more lately is Miyazaki's done this before with Manus, where like when Manus's soul gets fragmented, he becomes like five different women. So I kind of like
Hmm.
I've been kind of thinking about it. I've been like entertaining it, and I definitely wouldn't be opposed to like Mesmer being the Glowmaid Queen's child, or like being a fragment, or like having a fragment of her power to some degree. Because like I know flame is also associated with death, and that death's flame has kind of lost its color over time. So there's some interesting stuff with fire going on there.
And his
But
some of his fire is
black.
blackish, yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah. I
also so it would kind of make sense for him to be. He's got red hair like Radigan. He has red fire, but it also has black, and Radigan is connected to the fire giants in some way that I'm not entirely sure how.
There's some historic stuff, some historic imagery that I was talking about in my trailer breakdown recently about that's been really cool to see. But like obviously Radagon and his forces that are marching on that city
You
are
mean
very
Mesmer?
like or sorry, Mesmer, yeah, that are marching on that city are very like Roman centurion style. And that like a lot of the architecture that is being referenced in that city is also Roman. You have like the Solomonic pillars that the Romans used to mimic the first temple of Jerusalem. So there's a lot of like Roman aesthetics that are happening. Because the Romans used to like lay siege on one another quite often. They would like fight internally quite a bit. But there were some people that were living inside the city and outside the city who were like the Celtic Druids and some of the kind of like nomadic groups that existed all the way across the Eurasian steppe. And so you have what looks like people that kind of resemble practices that are quite polytheistic and like quite nature worshipy being shut down by people that are very like Roman inspired. And then also like Mesmer's centurions utilizing the Wicker Men to
Mm,
march against these kind of like Celtic Druid inspired nomadic nature worshiping groups,
yeah,
which which is like super cool because like originally it was the Celtic Druids that used the Wicker Men and the Romans reported that they existed. So it's interesting to see like Roman soldiers using like a spiritual object against those people in mockery. And like there's like the fire giant effigies, or what am I saying? Fire giant effigies that are on the side of the Wickerman too. There's like these red-haired
yeah. If the point was
masks.
to mock them while in battle, then
Yeah.
then the fire giants would have to be connected to the people of the Land of Shadows for that to be effective.
Yes, 100%. And I think the fact that you have like this like spiritual practice that's being mocked and quite literally turned into like a weapon of punishment against the people that it's like representing, I feel like is huge. I feel like that gives us like a huge insight into like Radagon and Mesmer and all that stuff. But as to what it is saying, I don't know yet.
Do you have any thoughts on where that might fit in the timeline? Because like pre Godfrey,
Oh yeah,
during Godfrey, okay, pre Godfrey.
probably like Free or dirt? It's so hard to say.
Hmm.
I would say like on the cusp of Godfrey, but I would also say like I think that we're also going to be getting some like Crucible related stuff, which is like Godfrey's Crucible Knights were kind of like popped up or like propped up around that era. So it's probably during this era, like obviously we're not going in the past by any means, but we're going to like we're going to like a landmass that hasn't really seen the same passage of time that the Outer Lands Between has seen. Because like obviously in the Outer Lands Between we have fundamentalist Golden Order and we have like a lot of political and religious stuff that has changed. But it seems like when we're going into the Shadowlands, we're going into a culture that's kind of been untouched by Golden Order fundamentalism for like an extended period of time. Um, you know, outside of like Mesmer marching on people. But I think we're going to see a lot of like preserved cultural stuff, like the Lion Dancer boss that we've
Right.
seen
Right.
Miyazaki talk about. He talked about how that culture is like still present and represented in the Shadowlands. So I'm excited.
Okay. Let's get to the my traditional question that I ask all the content creators that I
Yeah.
have on here. Was Marika involved in the Night of the Black Knives, and if so, how?
I think that she knew the ladies. I think she may have even at some point like I don't know, she's very sh she strikes me as somebody who's done multiple political assassinations, you know? Like, that's the vibe I get from her, especially given the new story trailer that we've seen, like, it wouldn't surprise me if she was a Black Knife assassin at some point, you know, like, during her during her youth or something, but, the fact that it's so interesting because Ronnie, like, when we have Ronnie's dialogue and we show her the Black Knife print and everything, the Black Knife print is like metaphysical language that quite literally we're able to like tell that she was the one who did it. And then like Rajier deciphers the knife print and is like, yeah, Ronnie did this. And then we bring it to Ronnie and Ronnie's like, yeah, I did that.
Hmm.
And so it's super interesting. Like when I was talking about this on stream, there's a lot of folks that haven't actually seen that dialogue or that haven't like encountered that. And so I think that some people
That's
might,
surprising.
yeah, like when I'm doing like a couple of playthroughs to prepare for the DLC, and on one of my playthroughs, made a point to like to show that dialogue to people because a lot of people are like, "Whoa, I didn't even know she like admits to it." And I think that like Ronnie quite clearly she done it, but like as far as whether or not Marika was like involved, I think at this point, so I'm of the mindset that like I think Marika at one point wanted to remove Destined Death from the rune, and I almost feel like Radagon is kind of this aspect of like who she was at that point in history. And then I think as time has passed, her feelings about it have changed. And that's why we get like that dialogue with Hugh about her wanting to slay a god and wanting to like kind of reverse what she did or,
Okay,
you know,
so
sending Godfrey away. I think that I'm not like one of the people that thinks that Marika is one way or the other. I think there was a change in her attitude over time.
yeah,
And I think that if the Night of the Black Knives were like, if she found out that Ronnie were doing it, I think that there's enough evidence to show that like she would potentially be down with it. But like, I don't know. We don't have any like other evidence outside of the fact that she was like once associated with that group. Like, if she had anything to do with it, we just know Ronnie did. So that's where I kind of sit on that.
well, there's the weird dialogue where she's talking to her demigod children, and she's telling them, make of thyself what you will, be it a lord or a god. Um, and she seems to have them all gathered. Like she's talking to all her demigod children. But if you fail to
Yeah.
become aught at all, you will be forsaken. And then then this seems to be before she shatters the ring. And then
Hmm.
for some reason, uh, well,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's from grief from Godwin's death, which seems some people assume it is. She shatters the ring. The shards go to the demigods somehow. They fight it out. They fail to become Elden Lord. And just like Marika said they would be, they're forsaken. Grace is extended to the Tarnished, and she seems to be the one controlling where Grace goes. It seems to be directly her, which I suppose lends some. It's kind of like the idea you were talking about, where the greater will isn't entirely distinct from Marika. She picks where the Grace
Yeah.
seems to land. The demigods are forsaken. The people from the Shattering are forsaken. Grace is extended to the Tarnished, and the Tarnished return, which is weird because she told them that that's what she was going to do way back when she banished Godfrey, which is before the Liurnian
I think
Wars. This is
Yeah, I think when she banished Godfrey, that was the point. For me, I don't think it was Godwyn's death. I think it was earlier than that. I think it was like
Mhm,
Mogan Morgott's birth. I think it was like and this is kind of getting into this isn't what I'm about to say isn't spoiler territory, but I feel like there's some stuff that can be spoilery that also supports this that we'll talk about later. But I think that she was trying to suppress something like death, and she was trying to suppress um, like the need for new trees. Like there's all the mythology regarding like the Erd tree and the minor Erd trees. And a lot of people didn't know that the seeds of the Erd tree even existed because they perceived the tree as eternal. That's in like the Cerulean talisman
mhm.
and some of the talisman items. Talks about how like the social attitudes regarding the tree was that everybody thought the tree was eternal and it can never reproduce. But given that people that sprout horns are like obviously horns are an aspect of the crucible, but looking at the ancestral follower and like the Ul Palace ruin practices, I kind of wonder if there was this need to like grow new trees and that Morgott and Moog are kind of like these horned entities that like represent this previous era and a coming of a new tree and potentially the burning of the Ur tree, like hearkening, like kind of like a prophecy of it's time to burn the tree. It's time for a new era to start. And I think it's at this point where she's having to like outlaw aspects of the crucible and she's having to outlaw Omen and she's having to it's
Punish
almost
people that
like
have visions of the Earth tree burning.
yeah, it's like she's having to like play she's like constantly having to like run away from her own choices, sealing away death. And I think it's at this point, kind of like during Godfrey's era, that she's starting to realize like her her time is ticking and like she's pushing back against it and she's trying to have this eternal era and like the sap is starting to deplete and like maybe holy or like religious attitudes are changing because the sap is starting to deplete. It just feels like there's this period in history where all of a sudden there's a shift in like her attitude and like she's wanting to start preparing like her children and like shattering the ring and like sending Godfrey away and
Mhm.
kind of laying the groundwork for like her betrayal, almost her own betrayal against herself. And
Yeah,
in this case, Radagon, like, and that's why I think Radagon is like this part of her that represents like who she was
right,
at the start of all of this in a
right.
way. So I guess in a sense, when you were asking me earlier, like, is this the point in which Radagon was born in that cinematic trailer? I almost feel like maybe metaphorically or like spiritually, maybe, yeah.
Right. Because that would be the point where she's building her order. She took the rune of death out of the Elden Ring.
Yeah, it's like she made this choice and then a part of her is doubling down on it and like exist like moving forward the way that she would have before. And then there's this other part of her, the side of her that is represented by her female self that is like questioning and that is betraying herself and that is constantly trying to shatter the ring while the other side of her is trying to repair it. Like it seems like she's just in conflict.
Okay, all right. So I'm I'm very receptive to that. She was already laying the groundwork for this by the time she sends Godfrey away and the
Yeah.
Tarnished and tells them pretty much exactly what's going to happen. And by the time that she's talking to her demigod children, she's already has a lot of things in place for what's to come,
Yeah.
including I suppose Melina and maybe Mikola since Melina has Torrent.
But I don't see, I guess outside of Ronnie, like supporting Ronnie's era, I don't see so much what she would gain
The only
from
thing I can
Godwyn dying.
the only thing I can think of is two things.
Mhm.
Number one, she in the trailers before, in the gameplay trailer for Elden Ring, this dialogue doesn't exist in game, but it exists
Yeah.
for Melina, where she talks about, um, that you have to struggle. They will fight and they will die. For how else will a champion or a lord be born? Uh, and she has the dialogue where she's talking to her demigod children. She's like, make something of yourselves. It doesn't matter what it is, be it a lord or a god. But if you don't make anything out of yourselves, you will be forsaken. So it's almost like she's trying to get them to struggle, because that's how you make an Elden Lord. You need adversity. That's the only way to do it. Kind of crucible, but not a mixing pot, like a trial crucible. Um, and so she either has the Knight of the Black Knives to call out all of the unwanted demigod children, as the ghost in the mausoleum calls them, to call them, and create suspicion amongst the rest of them so that they war over the remaining pieces. Or that was her intent. She didn't want Godwyn to die specifically. She just wanted some of them to die to kick off the war. But Godwyn she cared about. And Ronnie's the one that had the plan to get rid of Godwyn so that she could start her own thing. She killed herself at the same time with Godwyn so that she died in body and Godwyn died in soul. And that wasn't part of Marika's plan. And that's what caused her to shatter the ring. That's one possibility. There's also the Godwyn's death would be the one that causes them to be suspicious of each other. There's the Sword Monument that talks about how there is a sovereign alliance, but there's a suspicion around the sovereign alliance, and it leads to the first defense of Leyendell. So the sovereign alliance may be talking about the thrones that Morgoth has in his throne room. There might have been a point post shattering where they're all trying to jointly rule, or briefly trying to jointly rule in this sovereign alliance, and then can't because they're suspicious of each other, because at least two of them were part of the conspiracy. And that kicks off with Godric attacking Leyendell. Or Marika was not recanting. There's a finger reader crone. See, this is what I'm talking about, where I'm confused. Like, there's too many options. There's a finger reader crone in the Deep-Root Depths that talks about Godwyn and how he should have been a martyr to destined death, and that what's happening to him now is humiliating. The word martyr is weird to me in this context, because a martyr is someone whose death would forward a goal. It would be of some use for him to have died for something. If he had just died and was killed, that wouldn't have made him a martyr. She's like, oh, if only he had been martyred to destined death instead of what happened here where he's the deathless prince. Well, even if he had died, that wouldn't have made him a martyr. Even if he had died a true death, that wouldn't have made him a martyr. Why is his death needed to be in service to the rune of death? Almost as if that wasn't planned, and Marika had other intentions for him dying. Maybe to inter him in the tree. Maybe he didn't look like that when they interred him into the roots of the great tree.
I don't think he did.
Right, because it would be weird for them to do that.
Yeah, yeah. I think that if he was starting to grow like that, I don't know if they would have stuck him into the minor tree like that, because it's like inadvertently causing all the death root.
Right. It seems like he looks, he falls to the ground in the story trailer for the initial thing. You can see his eyes, things, and there's stuff underneath his skin. But it's not, I don't think it was clear to them that he was going to turn into this giant mermaid, deathless monster. It could have just been, okay, he's a hero. He's the best demigod ever. We inter him in a place of honor at the center of the Deep-Root Depths. Maybe that was a way to extend her age, if she isn't, assuming that maybe the opposite is true, and I'm wrong about her wanting the Tarnished to come back and the demigods to fight. Maybe she was trying to kill Godwyn to have him feed the Erdtree, because the Age of Abundance was over. The dew doesn't fall anymore. She wants to extend it even further. He gets interred into the tree to get it absorbed, but Ronnie does her thing. They don't know about it. He becomes she's distraught. It's a humiliation. The sign of the golden bough doesn't even get to extend the Age of Fire. Now she breaks the Elden Ring, and everything else happens, and she continues events. Or a combination of several different things. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, it's so that's one of those things. The Knight of the Black Knives, like we were talking about Radagon, there's so many things that are just like, intentionally left out, and I definitely think it's intentional on Miyazaki's part. I think he picked some really important moments in history to leave in the dark for us to discover for this DLC. Like I feel it. I feel it in my bones. I think we're gonna get um some really interesting stuff
Thank
out of
goodness. So thank good.
storyline.
I almost like have other content creators to talk about the DLC and the potential for that, and I'm so relieved when they tell me that, because it's like therapy. It's like, no, don't worry.
Yeah.
It's just like we're huffing copium at each other. Don't worry. He's totally going to show us. He's going to give us the things that we need.
Oh no,
It's
and
intentionally taken out.
we'll talk about some stuff later after spoiler stuff. But this was actually like a theory that I had before any of the story trailers and before anything had come out. We had just got that picture of Mikola riding Torrent when we got the painting initially, and we just kind of saw that image of the tree being crushed by something growing around it. I 100% initially thought that that was going to be Deathroot. Like I was in the camp, I was in the Deathroot camp. Like I was thinking that that big second tree that was strangling what looked like the Erd tree was like we were finally going to resolve it. It seems like interesting that no matter what ending that we pick in Elden Ring, save for like the Frenzied Flame ending and maybe Ronnie's ending, that those who live in death and Deathroot don't get reversed. Or like we have Fia's ending, which writes them into history, like that they're those who live in death are witnessed under the Golden Order. Like they're acknowledged, you know, they're not outlawed anymore and we won't hunt them down anymore. But like for the
They're
most
not
part,
gone. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, like they're not gone. And no matter what ending we pick, like if you pick Golden Order, like Gold Mask's ending, or if you pick
Yeah, he
any,
doesn't
yeah,
seem like he's going to persecute them either, because he
no,
does. There's those item descriptions where he doesn't like them getting persecuted.
yeah, he specifically is focusing on transcendental ideology. So things, it's no longer a fundamental doctrine. It's about like internal. It's not about like the circumstances of how you are physically. It's like an ideology. It's your internal purpose. So I think that like we have things that just kind of we it doesn't reverse anything that's happened. It just kind of like acknowledges or like ignores it. But like at the end of the day, if Deathroot continues to grow, everybody's going to become those who live in death.
Mm.
Like it's just going to continue to spread, and then people won't be able to be absorbed into the Erd tree anymore, and then everyone is just going to be. It's
Yeah,
just going to be like
there's no plan to deal with the death root on any
no,
ending, except perhaps the frenzied flame ending.
yeah, just burn them, I guess. But like, it makes me wonder, like, because obviously we have some really interesting things that are being said by FromSoft with the endings and with all of this, which is kind of like at a certain point in history, when you've built up your systems to be a certain way, can you actually reverse the damage that you've done, or is it done, and will it continue to spread? And like, at what point are you able to change or go back or
So
fix things?
I have an
So,
interesting perspective
go for
on
it.
those who live in death that I don't think anybody else thinks. I think nobody else
Yeah.
shares, and is you know, you feel free to push back on me with this, but I think that they represent losers. I think they represent social outcasts that the information we have on them is so small. Like Fia describes them as the meek and the many. Roger describes them as people who came upon the flaw of the order and as a result are the way that they are. They're this way through no fault of their own, specifically because they came upon a flaw in the order. They're the meek and the many. So I think that they're people that failed in the current order, through no fault of their own, simply through circumstances. That's what they represent. And
Mhm.
that's why they're persecuted. It makes a lot of sense to me, because if your system claims to be perfect and eternal, and
Yes.
it does claim to be perfect and eternal, then having social outcasts that failed to integrate into the system through no fault of their own is evidence that your system is not perfect and eternal, and so you have to
Yes.
persecute them. They're literally living in death, um, yeah, they're losers. There's losers.
Yeah.
I think that's what they are.
Yeah. I think obviously like if we're looking at losers within the context of like the
Right, but
Golden Order itself.
right,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
because I said it's not their
Yeah.
fault, but that's
Yeah,
what,
exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
not
Like
as in a pejorative, like they lost in
Yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
in the system.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I definitely agree with that. And I think um it also shows that, you know, failing your people if you have an era that is promising abundance but can't deliver on that,
Hmm.
um it's going to just spread and it's going to get worse and the foundations of your society is going to crumble. I think that that's kind of like the I think you were right. And I think
It's a sin to
the
be unhappy. It's a sin to,
yeah,
yes, right.
and it's going to continue to spread if like you're I mean like I it's weird cuz like this gets into like a whole philosophy conversation
Yes.
because my chat and I kind of when I stream it's kind of like the unhinged like we're talking about sociology and philosophy and like a bunch of other stuff but um we've definitely talked like quite a bit about how your sense of purpose and your sense of spirituality do tie into economy, whether or not we want to admit it or the fact that we like it. Like in my circumstance, I hate it. It sucks. It sucks to feel like my sense of self-worth and purpose are dictated by how much I make and like how much I'm able to provide. But, I feel like those who live in death embody that. Like they embody not being able to live up to a particular standard. And I feel like a lot of us are feeling it today, especially like I know obviously Miyazaki isn't writing about the the economic situation in America, but like I think that it's easy for a lot of folks who are struggling financially or struggling with the job market or experiencing their recession.
Right.
It can be really easy to relate to the storyline of those who live in death, I feel like.
Okay. Now I'm glad you agreed with me.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. Long-winded way of saying I agree with you.
Yeah. Okay. Where were we? Now I'm lost.
I don't know.
I'm
It's
supposed
okay.
I'm supposed to keep
Sorry.
track, and I've forgotten.
Okay, wait, hold on. Let me run to the bathroom really quick. Hold
Go
on.
ahead. Go ahead.
All right, I'm back.
Okay. Since I think I've lost my whatever tangent we were on, I guess we'll just move on to the next one. Okay, I think we should probably finally get to the. I actually
The
had
DLC.
more stuff, but
Oh no.
no, but we should probably just get actually to the previous. So, if you need to leave, audience, now would be the time. We're gonna just dive right in past this point.
Yes.
Okay. Uh, do you have thoughts on the previews and the things that they revealed?
Yeah. So one of the things, since kind of like we were on our tangent about Godwin and death, one of the things that I noticed that was brought up about the preview is that Godwin does have a
A
presence. I was
presence,
actually like,
yeah.
yeah, so I have mixed feelings, obviously, because I was very hardcore. Like I feel that Mikkela's purpose is largely influenced by their siblings. And I know that there's a lot of like discourse happening around like is Mikola Griffith and like if is Mikola like this evil manipulative psychopath. I definitely think Griffith Mikola I'm calling oh no a slip.
It's over.
It's over. I think that Mikola is like very compassionate towards their siblings circumstances and I think that they prioritize their siblings like safety and finding a cure above all else and if that includes manipulating populations as opposed to like killing them off in order to like find a solution, I think that Mikla would do that. So a lot of the like Mikla compelling affection I think serves a purpose and I think that purpose is to like we were reading about like Mikla leaves Golden Order fundamentalism to find a cure for Melania, but the Golden Epitaph also talks about Godwin dying a true death, and also Mikla became associated with the walking mausoleums, and obviously there's the soulless demigods, but specifically reviving and like the link to Godwin being soulless
Hmm.
and him trying to duplicate remember because if you think about mechanically like what the walking mausoleums do, they duplicate remembrances. So he would be able to duplicate Godwin's soul potentially. Like that's the goal, right? Like the end goal is to do something regarding remembrances and
Right.
something regarding soulless demigods. So
Yeah. And then there's
it kind of
the castle
seems,
soul dialogue where they're trying
yeah,
to do something, they're trying to eclipse the
the
sun,
eclipse.
and
Yeah,
and that will cause life to be brought back to the soulless bones, but it didn't work
yeah,
for some reason.
yeah. So I'm thinking that his traversal into the Shadowlands and also like, um, you know, some of the stuff regarding the cut Saint Trina concept, like, that was happening. I think that there's gonna be a lot of lore because we had, like, the Godwin representation happening, like, there's some soldiers that are loyal to Godwin according
Right,
to
right,
Bati.
right.
So it seems like we still might have the Godwin plot point because that was like I said before, it's been driving me crazy that there's no solution to those who live in death, or there's no acknowledgement of them. They just kind of, like, continue to exist under Golden Order.
It's weird that he has soldiers because that's not the impression I had gotten out of Godwin's followers. Uh, with Fia and those who live in death, they don't seem like they. Okay, do you think that Godwin has a anything other than a mindless presence? Any kind of consciousness?
I don't, but I think that there are remnants of, like, Godwin cults. There's a so at the base of the minor Erd tree that Godwin is buried under, there's an omen and a bunch of commoners that have black veils that have Godwin specific. They use, like, Fia's mist against you, and they have Deathblight specific attacks. They're
Mm,
on the top side of Landel, sitting around the dead minor Erd tree, because obviously that Erd tree is dying because Godwin. But there's also Godwin themed crabs in that area too, like
hmm.
the Deathbite blight crabs that are down over by where Bogart is cooking. Um, so there's some, like, really interesting implications there regarding, like, tiny cults and, like, little groups that are popping up regarding Godwin, so I wonder if maybe those knights are related to that.
Do you think Meko's motivations is still benevolent towards his siblings, including Godwin and Melania? Do you think that what he's trying to do in the Shadowlands relates to his
Yeah,
endeavors in the Lands Betweens?
so I think so if we're I also I'm weird about cut content. Sometimes I consider it, and sometimes I feel like I'm okay with it being cut content and being left on the cutting room floor. Obviously, if it makes room for them to actually, like, fully realize a boss or a concept. There were some Bloodborne bosses that got left on the cutting room floor, and their fully actualized versions are much better. And so I'm like, I'm cool with them being left behind. But then there's some cut content that I feel like does give us like artist intent or like writer intent with the way that they were taking a particular character. And I think that we had a lot of cut content regarding Saint Trina and like the Cradle song and like a bunch of other stuff with the Frenzied Flame and the Wandering Caravan. And it seems like
Mm.
Mikola is stuck in a situation where like the Wandering Caravan is suffering, Melania is suffering, Godwin is suffering, and it seems like there's this
Right, right.
constant
I forgot that
effort.
Trina was the sleep helps combat the flame of frenzy.
Yeah,
I
like
forgot
she
about
was
that.
trying to like yeah, she was trying to give them some reprieve or some peace because they were suffering in the capital below. And it just kind of seems like there is this association or like attention to suffering that they have. And whether or not that's like self-serving or whether or not there's like some duplicitous reasoning behind it is whatever, but it just seems like they are wanting to resolve those conflicts in like a peaceful way that absolves whoever is suffering of their suffering. And I think if we do encounter Mikola as like a boss, it's going to be maybe a Mikola that is giving into despair or like Mikola that is like unable to find the resolutions that they want or is willing to like hurt people to if there's like a path of no suffering for Melania and Godwin and the Wandering Caravan, if they then have to cause the suffering of others, would they do it? And I think that that's going to be like
He,
kind of like an interesting conflict.
his whole thing does seem to be he does help people. You
Yeah.
have the misbegotten all over the Halictree. You have the Albinarics that pilgrimage there. You have I think Loretta was trying to protect the Albinarics. Some people think that she was an Albinaric because she's on a horseback and maybe can't use her legs. And then there's this sacred crown helm that talks about Mikla being the who shall Mikla bless if not the low and the meek. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of evidence of him not being evil.
Yeah. And then a lot of people obviously like point to the bewitching branch or point to the fact that the Halig Tree Knights blow themselves up. There's evidence that shows that affection can be used, like affection, faith, and worship can be used as like a weapon. And I think that that's true. but I think that like while I don't know, it's obviously like way more nuanced and gray. Like I don't think Mikola is like heinous or awful. I think they're doing their best in a setting and in a situation where like there is just so much suffering and so many curses and so many things that I don't know, like exist in
He's kind
everyone's
of an
disservice, you know.
he reminds me of a I don't actually know very much about 40K, but he seems to be in like a kind of 40K situation
Yeah.
where everything is terrible and there's literally outer gods, and he's combating like several different things at once and everything's already broken. It's like he's got to make whatever decisions he can to, you know, salvage what he might.
Yep. 100%. 100%. Especially as like a ruler and as somebody that has is trying to like bring about their own era. I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of questions that Mikla needs answering. Like it seems like maybe w- answers regarding the Halig tree, answers regarding the outer gods, answers regarding what Marika was doing and why certain curses and certain things like exist. Um, and I'm very ready to see how that all comes together. I'm trying to think of what else, because there's so much to talk about regarding the new content, but I'm trying to think of like things regarding Mikola that we've been hearing. Like we've been hearing a lot of good stuff from his followers. Like obviously his followers
There
call
is the
him
one
Mikola the
guy
Kind.
that yeah, they all seem to
Oh
call him
yeah.
Mikla. There was that one guy who is from the Land of Shadows
Yes.
who doesn't like you or any of the Erdtree people, but Mikla apologized to them and he will make his apologies. Uh, that was interesting. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't I don't actually think. Do you have any idea what he's trying to do?
So this is the NPC that is the horn scent, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that like if you're, like if you're part of like a druid group that is like worshiping candle trees and like worshiping certain prophecies and like has like a culture and a civilization and you get raided by an emperor and your people get impaled and you witness extreme suffering, if that emperor's child came up to you and was like, "Oh geez, I'm really sorry," like yeah, I think I would also feel weird. I think I also would be distrusting of Mikola or like would be uncertain about the purpose of them being there because like what if their purpose doesn't align with like my culture? Like what if they're just like perpetuating the same thing but in a different way?
Mm.
Um it seems like it would make sense that someone would be suspicious.
I find his overall goal, whatever it could be, odd, considering that Melania might be dead by the time that we get to the DLC. Because
Ah, yeah, that's like a thing. Like I actually have two different playthroughs, and I have one playthrough that I'm intentionally not killing Melania on when I go into the DLC because I wonder if we're gonna get. I know obviously we're not getting different endings, but for those of you that have played Dark Souls and Bloodborne, you do get special dialogue by doing certain things within the DLC or within the
not
vanilla
doing
game.
certain things.
Yeah. Yeah, like in Bloodborne, if you kill Lady Maria and you go talk to the doll, she has special dialogue. So a lot of neat stuff like that.
Are you keeping Melania alive?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I have the same playthrough that I've killed Melania. I've also burned the Erd Tree, um, and then but I burned the Erd Tree using the Frenzied Flame and then cured it. And then I have another playthrough that I have another playthrough where I'm keeping Melania alive, but I'm going to burn Melina, and then I have a third one that we started yesterday because I'm cracked at this point now. Where this one is Burpo the Foul, and I think we're just gonna play her like the worst person ever. So I'm excited for that one. We're gonna make Bach become like a weird skinny white boy, and then he's gonna die in Renala's boss room.
They did have some important dialogue in especially in Dark Souls 3 if you did certain things, but it wasn't a lot, and that makes me
No,
it makes me
it
curious.
was
It's like I almost, if it was like the other games where maybe you go into the past or something, uh, then it wouldn't affect too much what it is that you're doing. But if Miquela's goal is specifically related to having Malenius cured of her rot, for example, um, and she's dead, maybe he just doesn't know about it. Maybe the game will hand wave it away. But to me, it almost seems like there's nothing to do with his goal. Maybe simply from a mechanical perspective, it might not be anything to do with it. You know, he just left her there, and he's going off to the Shadowlands for an unrelated reason.
Well, it seems like so the perspective that I always thought or like the series of events is that I'm in the camp that thinks that Melania marched on Radon because not because she wanted his Elden Ring or because the War of the Shattering was happening. I think she marched on Radon because of the eclipse not occurring. And I
Mm,
do think that him holding the stars in stasis also held other celestial bodies. Like for example, like the eclipse couldn't occur in the way that Miquella was anticipating because of that. So I think she marched on him. I think that's why we have to kill Radon before we can enter the DLC.
it would make sense.
And then I think also too the reason why she was able to come back and Finlay carried her back to the Halig tree is because they're waiting for Miquella to continue to enact the plan that was intended. And there's some really cool dialogue regarding, like when we enter Melania's boss room, she's like sleeping by Miquella's tree body and is waiting for their return. And so I think that there's like something going on there.
And Marika blessed Miquela's journey.
Yeah.
We learned that in the previews. There's an item that apparently talks about that. That I did not
Hmm.
expect. That I did not
Yeah.
expect.
Yeah. I'm so curious to see if like maybe she's hoping that Miquella will find the answer that she couldn't find or like what the deal with that is. Or if she wants to show Miquella what happened to her and like
Mm.
why things are the way they are. I don't know.
That would
And
explain
it's
why Miquella even knows about the Shadowlands and what happened there. America would have had to have told her, or somebody would have had to have told him.
yeah, I think that obviously we have like Saint Trina who's able to like intuit enter dreams and like understand that like it seems like there's some secret knowledge that Miquella is privy to because of like their also like their dual identity. So I wonder if there's a little bit of that that has to do with it. Like maybe they were able to discern something about the Shadowlands. But yeah, I also wonder if Marika maybe told them. It's really interesting too because like Miquella seemed to be like the favored child of Radagon. Like it seemed like they're the only child that seems to have some kind of relationship with either of the parents.
Yeah,
It doesn't there's no like flowery stories about like Melania, hanging out with Radagon or Marika. Like she mainly hung out with the swordsman,
yeah,
but all of the other demigod kids, like Radon was hanging out or was like a fan of Godfrey of all people,
yeah.
which is like so random, but like
Well,
go
he liked
off.
his dad. He liked his dad.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious. I'm curious to see if we get more like information about their relationships too.
it's going to be interesting if the eclipse was the if we find
Did
if
you
the
notice? Oh my God, sorry. I like almost knocked everything off my desk because I got too excited. Sorry. Did you notice that the DLC comes out on the full moon?
I did not notice that. That's amazing.
Oh my God.
That's
Okay,
amazing.
I want to give a shout out to Manus Celeste on Twitter for pointing that out. Twitter, Bamco's official Twitter community manager put out a calendar of when the DLC is launching, but on the calendar, it was weird. They put like little dates on there. They put like Juneteenth and like first day of Pride and like they put like national events or like events happening in the US. But then they like weirdly included the moon phases on the calendar, which is like so fucking weird. Like you don't normally put the phases of the moon on the calendar, but yeah, the DLC comes out on the full moon.
Let me look at this.
Yeah, go to the website or the not the website, the official Twitter.
I think we should accept this as evidence. I think we should
Yeah.
accept this as evidence. That's weird.
It's so weird. You don't put that on stuff.
They're purposely drawing attention to it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So okay.
So I think
That would okay. Radon needs to die. That's already
Yes.
odd. Um,
We
the
we actually have a community member, Teslobo, in my Discord who is going to intentionally not kill Radon or Moog before the DLC comes
to
out.
see what
And
happens, see how they
yeah,
guide you
because
to it.
well, they also like Teslobo also was thinking like maybe there's going to be like a new NPC at the Radon Festival or something. Like
Hmm.
they're just like, I gotta see what's happening. So yeah, I'm curious to see if we're gonna get any extra guidance during those boss fights.
All right. Well, if it is the case that we need to kill Radon to enter the DLC, and that is the case, and then if Melania marched on Radon to kill him to make the stars move, so that the when they realized that their eclipse wasn't working, then it has to have to do with Godwin.
It has to. It
Yeah.
has to. I'm like convinced, especially with all of like the Castle Soul imagery and the eclipse being such like a cornerstone of Mikla's story, it would be weird for it to not be touched on in some degree.
Mm.
I also think too, there's like that there's a boss design that's like a little ambiguous that I'm curious about. This one is not so spoilery because it's been in the marketing material, but it's that big skeleton on the horse that
Yeah.
looks like it could either be like an albinoric because it's losing its legs and it's kind of turning into a blob, but there's also a black mass inside the skeleton's rib cage that is super interesting. And I was wondering if maybe that was Deathroot or if that is like a new thing. If this kind of entity is like a new entity that we haven't encountered yet.
But
Um, but I'm
I
curious.
thought it was a mimic tier that is acting like Radon. Radon.
Yeah, yeah. Like there's the horse is like decaying and kind of like the skin is ripping away. It's not just kind of melting, which is a little weird. But um the black mass inside the skeleton rib cage reminds me of those, you know those skeletons around Landell that can do the Deathrite bird attack?
Yes.
It kind of looks like there's like black goop inside of
Ah.
them. I've wondered if that's why there's black goop inside the rib cage, or it could be totally mimic related as well. But like it just seems weird that a mimic is
Does its weapon look like the Orphan of Kos's weapon to
yeah.
you?
It does. It's not yeah, it's not quite a an ovary or like a like a not like a fallopian tube, sorry. There's like reptilian where they store eggs. It's an ovary. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. My brain can't work. Yeah, it kind of like has the same shape, and I imagine that it's gonna have some of the same attacks. But let me see if I can find it again. I'm like, I don't have all my materials. Yeah, it just seems weird that a mimic would be like, I'm a skeleton, I guess. Like I don't and like why the head looks like that.
Yeah.
Like it's like a long spine that's like curved over with like a black bubble on the end of it. It's so weird. It's like it's one of the weirder enemy designs, and I'm really excited to see that guy's story.
I would be interested in a boss fight like that where he stops doing that and gets
Yeah.
more complete as the fight goes
Yeah.
on.
That would be cool. Yeah, if it is a mimic tier, if it's like slowly forming,
Mm,
or like if there's a reason why it's kind of malformed in the way that it is,
mm, mm.
that would be cool. I'd love to see a version of that.
Okay, I'm surprised we haven't talked about Rilana yet.
Yeah, oh my God. That was that like made me just sit with the Three Sisters Rise for like a solid 10 minutes after. Because like I've always wondered, like I've always kind of assumed that predating Ronnie, if it wasn't ever called Ronnie's Rise, was that Renala's. And then why is there a Celavis Rise when he's obviously not a sister?
Hmm.
Like I've always wondered, are the Three Sisters just referencing historical figures? Are they referencing other buildings? Are they referencing like the three fates in mythology? Like, is this just like a loose series of buildings that royals can use, or were there actually three sisters that existed at some point in time? And I kind of wonder now if like uh Renala, Rolana, and then Rena, or some other third entity that we don't know about was a part of it. I don't know.
How is how is Rena spelled? R two N's?
Renna, yeah.
Okay.
Because I know some people were speculating
What
too
if
that,
Rena is Renala and
yeah, that's what, yeah,
yeah.
that she was like she's Renala of the full moon at Raya Lucaria in the daytime, but then kind of like when she's off the clock, she's Rena, and it's the opposite side of the moon. It's like the dark side of the moon or like the occult secret side. Like some people think it's like Renala's other self, but I always thought that the doll's appearance was like super interesting. And like it almost looks like the Royal Revenant collars that we see, where there's like four-armed people that use bells to summon spirits.
Do you have
Um,
a theory as to why Relana and Renala have moons? Like there's a twin moon spell apparently now that Relana is tied to.
yeah,
And they both saw these moons and so do you have any ideas as to what's going on with that?
I I know that because isn't there like a separate moon
Yes.
on Manus Celeste?
Yeah.
Can't we see like two moon?
You could see
This is
both moons from there. Yeah.
this is why so like there's certain things that I'm super jacked into. I feel like, and I feel like this is the curse of being like an Elden Ring lore person, is there's too much lore that I feel like there's people that specialize in particular things. Like I definitely feel like I'm, like a Smough is like the Albinoric blood clot like specialist, and then I feel like I'm obsessing over like the ancestral followers and like the Ul Palace. Everybody has their thing that like they love to look at and stare at in the game. But the moons make me like turn me into like a grumpy old person. Like I just
Back in my
I
day,
just
we
like
only had one moon.
yeah, exactly. That's like I'm like you're telling me there's two moons on Mana Celeste, and then you're telling me
There's a
there's a
dark moon
black moon and
too.
there's a dark moon and then the black moon and the eternal cities. Like you're telling me there's like another moon like so the Mana Celeste thing, I thought was really like I do think it's super clever though, because it's like it's like secret, it's like a secret place with like the secret fingers underground and like secret two moons. So there's tons of stuff that Miyazaki's been alluding to. I think having George R. R. Martin write the mythology of the game has really allowed them to pick and choose what kind of hints they are able to kind of like lay up. Do you know what I mean? For like the DLC. I think Miyazaki's writing before is quite it's quite one note. Like there's a lot of like easy threads to follow.
Mm,
Um a lot of the family drama that happened in Dark Souls was very straightforward. Like Gwyn had like a big deception that he was doing to like the general population, but like all of the kids' drama, it wasn't as like backstabby. There weren't as many layers. There weren't as
right.
many secrets.
Right.
And it feels like having Martin kind of like lay the groundwork for everything. That way, like during development, they can be like, well, let's keep this a secret. Let's keep this a secret. Let's keep this vague. I
Yeah,
think that's
yeah,
why we're
yeah.
getting,
That's interesting.
yeah,
It lets him pick where he's going to put the holes rather than create the holes around an idea.
yeah. Like I think it's freed up a lot of bandwidth for him to world build, and then also for him to like figure out how to obfuscate some stuff from us or
Well,
to like
well, he
hint
did
at
too well.
something.
He did
He
too
did too
good.
well. Yeah, exactly. Like I think that's why the community is so, and it's so funny because we also have, I've noticed too, I don't know if you've noticed this, but we over the years I feel like the community has kind of gotten scarred in a lot of ways. Like
Mm,
I was definitely of the people that like thought that Solaire was the firstborn 100%. Like I was fully like, yeah, like Solaire is Gwyn's firstborn. Um because he has like lightning spells and he's looking for a son and he has amnesia. Like I was fully like, yeah, this makes total sense. And then like I know Marcus, Epic Name Bro, was like a big Velka stan and was like waiting for Velka content in the DLC. Like, we have like certain pockets of the community that have experienced like being wrong or like things changing. I know a lot of people will say like, Miyazaki retconned X, Y, and Z. I don't feel that that's the case. I don't think he retconned anything. I think that he is just like so he's such like a trickster and he's so fucking sly. Like the pendant Do you remember the pendant thing?
Yeah.
Were you around during that?
Yeah.
Oh my god. And then he came out with the interview that was like, "Actually,
Oh,
the pendant doesn't do anything."
I was just messing with people. It doesn't do
Like,
anything. Just wanted to play
he's
a little
such a
joke.
yeah, like, he's such a troll, and so I think that, the layups for this DLC have felt like a, like a jigsaw trap. And it feels like Miyazaki's like, "Do you wanna play a game?" with, like, the whole lore community, and all of us are just like, "Ah!" And everyone's too scared to say anything because nobody wants to be wrong. Nobody wants to be, the next Velka stan.
I see. Yeah,
Yeah.
I kind of that's kind of the attitude I've had for a long time, and then just very, very recently, like when I started doing lore videos again, I'm like, I'm confident that we're all wrong,
Yes.
so we should speculate freely. Like
Exactly.
let's just have fun with it because I'm confident it's just not there. Like the information's just not there right now.
Yeah. 100%. And I kind of wonder, like, are we just gonna keep getting Mesmers and, Rolanas and, new characters that explain stuff, which would be totally fine and I'm totally down with. Um, or are we gonna get some answers to previous questions, which it
I'm
seems like we are.
I'm so positive we're gonna get answers to previous questions.
Yeah.
But
I'm excited about the bird enemies.
the Deathbird enemies,
Yes. I'm like a twin bird, death bird, like, one of my main characters that I'm going into the DLC with is a death bird cultist. Like, I'm ready. I'm ready to be that was one of the things that I felt like the Godwyn soldiers and the death bird enemies, like,
mm,
I'm all about it. I'm a Fair Missoula twin bird stan. I'm here. I'm here for it.
the things I'm interested in almost have confirmation to be better resolved. We're
What are you looking forward to?
well, first of all, the eclipse sun, the whole thing with the eclipse is something that's been bothering me for a long time. Uh,
Yeah.
that's guaranteed to have some lore bits that we can use to extrapolate information from the outer game, if not just outright being an important part of the DLC. It could be that. But then there's also the Carians. I love me some Carians, and I love the moons. I hate the moons because I don't understand the moons, but I love the Carians. I love the aesthetic. And now we have
Mhm.
Rilana, and Rilana, what she sided with Mesmer. When when the
Yeah.
Liurnia and the Golden Order, did they even know about each other? Were they at war at the time? Like, but like this is way before Radigan's war
Yeah.
with Liurnia. I have to assume.
And it seems like she's only vowing herself to him because she wants to perpetuate the tradition of ice and flame. Like,
Mm.
it seems like it's or like night and flame, which is like night has this like association with ice. It's weird. It's like so weird.
And then
Like I
they mirror
wonder.
each other too, because Renala has the sword of Night and Flame, and it's
Mhm.
Radigan and Renala. At least that's what it seems to be uh, hinting towards. And then her
Yeah.
sister has the same thing with Mesmer. And what if Mesmer actually is Radigan's son? Then what? What's going on
Yeah.
there? Then they're what what would even the relationship be now that I think about it?
That would be his aunt. His like uh his like what is it? Aunt-in-law,
Yeah.
but his wife. It's so yeah, it's so messy. It's so messy and I'm curious to see.
George, what are you doing?
Mhm. But I'm like I am wondering if we're gonna get any kind of confirmation too on so I'm a big person. This is like one of my videos that I have there oh god, there's too much. There's too much for me to talk about actually. My Liurnia video is like unhinged. The Dark Moon from the Undercities has the cuckoo birds on the top of it.
What?
I don't know if you've ever noticed that.
Let me,
Yeah.
let me see this.
The Dark Moon talisman. If you get a high-res PNG image of it, like from fandom or wherever, or like an asset folder, the top emblem at the very tippy top is the cuckoo birds peering at it. And it's the same print of the cuckoo birds that's on the tabard. The only difference is that one of their wings is not like fold pointing down, but it's the cuckoo birds.
Oh wow, it is.
Yeah. And so there's like weirdness regarding the order of the Order of the Cuckoo is also like another thing that I'm fully clocked into. Like I am obsessed with them. I'm obsessed with their order. I'm obsessed with the primordial glintstone and why it's heretical. Like I love that whole side story.
Yeah,
But I like fully feel that Radagon and the marriage that they had was intentionally to like cause internal conflict and to like incite.
between the Moon Queen and
Y-
the Star Academy.
Yeah, I think he went and he learned what he needed to learn, but he gifted that egg to Renala and she started doing rebirthing magic, which is heretical, and the cuckoo formed a coup against her because Radagon could not win the war against her. They were at a stalemate.
Yeah.
And so I'm fully like convinced with like Radagon's secret society that he ended up there because he created the Perceptors who like can't talk about their secrets and like a bunch of other I'm like I need to know. I need to know what happened. I need to know about Rolana. Like I'm because my first character was a Carrion prisoner and I ended up marrying Ronnie. And so that character that is like the death magic one, like the heretical death mage, but like I'm fully on that character, I'm fully gonna be like clocked into all the Carrion storyline, I think.
I've
So
always been very confused as to why the moon is different than the stars and why there's a conflict between them. Um,
yeah. I
and
think because the moon reflects the light from the sun, right?
okay, okay, that's good.
And like a
And
lot
the
of stars are their own suns, but they're distant. They're like distant light from like other celestial bodies. And some of them are reflected light, but most of the time it's like their own light. But the moon is quite literally like reflecting the sunlight. And when we experience like there's like the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse. And when we experience an eclipse where the moon is dark, it has no influence from the sun.
but then
So
the sun would have to have like it, the in-game importance of the sun is weird. Like it's
and
far
I want to talk
away,
about
it's
it.
tiny, and you
I
don't
want to
see.
talk about it.
Go ahead.
The Omen
Yes.
have an association with the sun, and I think that they were the original sun worshippers because the
It could
sun is portrayed on the the Omen
Wickerman
set that on the Wickerman, yeah, as like an effigy made out of the horns of Omen.
of
So quite
Omen.
literally like ripping the horns off of the horn scent and like making an effigy over the thing that they worship. Insane, cracked. I
And
love that design so much.
the lion dance description that one was very interesting. Like its divinity, it was sent
Yeah.
from above.
And the
Uh,
horn scent are also sent from above too.
yeah, and the minimization of the sun in the lands between, and the fact that an eclipse is related um to what Megala's trying to do.
Yeah.
There's sun
Yeah.
stuff going on.
Yeah, there's sun stuff going on and like blocking out the sun's power with the eclipse.
Uh,
So like, oh my God. Ugh. Hold on,
and
sorry. I'm
that
gonna
somehow
go.
keeps Dust and Death at bay. It's odd.
Yeah, this is like a history ramble. Sorry, I'm like dragging on this podcast way too long. The so me and this other content creator, Little Church Lore, have talked quite a bit a lot about Babylonian like rituals and a bunch of other stuff because the Oracle Bubble Men and a lot of the artifacts that are in the Undercities that have to do with Babylon all kind of tie into this. Because there's like weird Babylonian purification rituals that have to do with soap and the Claymen make like the items regarding the claymen and some of the stuff around them make the soap item in the game and allow you to like purify yourself. There's like a whole like history reference happening there with Mesopotamian culture. But there's like some really interesting stuff and like beliefs regarding the eclipse in Babylonian rituals where during an eclipse they thought that God couldn't see you or see your actions, and if there was like a sacrifice of like a king or a political figure that needed to happen during an eclipse, you could sacrifice something else in that person's place because God couldn't see you or couldn't see your
Huh.
actions. And so you're able to kind of like use a an effigy or you know, you can like kill like a doll or you can kill like a fake version of the king, and then when the eclipse passes, you're safe from like that sacrifice. And so it's super cool that we have like this sacrifice ritual happening and this eclipse thing happening and like needing to replace Godwin's spirit or like his soul or whatever. I just
Mm.
think it's like it's so cool that so much Mesopotamian history is being represented, and I think it's kind of alluding to some cool. Obviously, the eclipse is like Berserk reference aesthetically. We've seen it before in Dark Souls 3, but like I love to see all the history elements in it too.
Hmm. I
It's
think
good.
I think there's a good chance we're all going to get what we want. I think this is
Yeah.
like the more I talk about it, the more sure I am.
Yeah, same. Like, I feel like Miyazaki does this thing where he'll show off the flagship boss. So, like in Dark Souls, it's Artorias. In Bloodborne, it was Lady Maria, who was like on the promotional art. But these bosses are bosses that we fight typically midway through the DLC or early on. And then from then on, we tend to fight something bigger and much more shocking, like Manus or
Hmm.
Orphan of Kos or you know, in like Slave Knight Gale and like learning about the painted worlds and all that other stuff, like we tend to fight something that it has to do with a very like fabric of reality and like the curse or like why things are the way they are.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see who that boss is going to be. Is it going to be Godwin or is it going to be Mikola or is it going to be Marika? Because we obviously got our
And he'll
Radagon fight,
and he'll have a
you
lot
know.
more time to develop that this time around because in the other DLCs are so small because there's the boss and then there's the other boss. Really, that's usually how it goes. There's the boss that's Artorias and then there's the boss that's Manus. And yeah, you can go fight Calamite, but it's not really related to the progression of here's this boss and then there's the other boss. Now we get a nice smooth progression. It's like, okay, here's 2 or 3 bosses, and then maybe Mesmer. And then I have a bunch of other bosses to lead up to whatever it is that I'm trying to develop. He has a lot of time to develop what he wants if there's these 10, main story remembers bosses that the preview suggest there are.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm super excited to see I'm excited to see it. I don't know. There's so much.
Okay, we have gone over long. I have to get going, but this has been
Okay.
great.
Yeah.
I actually hate to end it here. There's at least a few other things to talk about. What we might have to do it again at some point if the
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if people want a part 2. I'm totally down to come on again if you'll have me.
perfect. All right, this has been the Yggdrasil podcast. Thank you all very much for coming. Goodbye, Quelaag.
Thank you. Bye.